What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Odin coming back with the box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Equalizer 3 easily dominate the top spot at the box office, with, according to Tony at Deadline, the second best opening ever at the Labor Day box office with $42 million. And as you all know, when it comes to Tony and pretty much anyone else that covers the box office, they tend to ignore things like inflation. But regardless of any of that, Equalizer 3 is definitely doing pretty darn well, especially when you compare it to the other films in the franchise. Right now, it seems to be on pace, at least according to its worldwide opening debut, to be on pace with the other films, meaning that the chance of it getting to around the $200 million range worldwide, which is where a lot of those other films also was able to reach, seems like a likely endpoint, which ultimately means that, hey, the audience for that film is saying the same or even having slightly growth to it. And when it comes to franchises, these days, it's better for you to be holding on to your audiences or even growing it just even slightly a little bit than what you're typically seeing with films like the films from the MCU, the DCEU, etc., where you're seeing just a bleeding of fans and a bleeding of overall box office dollars. All of this, of course, while Barbie has indeed finally taken the #1 spot from the Super Mario Brothers film as being the highest grossing movie of this year. That's right, Barbie beat Mario. Let that sink in for a moment. And here's the other thing too, Barbie is not done. Barbie is continuing to add to its money both domestically and internationally. And so the question now is, how much past Mario is it going to be? And also, does it have a chance of being able to catch the worldwide total of a film like Top Gun Maverick? We'll talk about all those things today, but let's go ahead and start off with Tony over at Deadline, as he mentions right here that right now, Equalizer 3 is set to have the best 4-day opening for Labor Day with $42 million as the summer clicks past $4 billion. Now, I obviously have issues whenever they say the summertime because, again, I've been back in school now for 3 weeks, and so it has not been summer for me for quite some time. I know that most people, especially at colleges, don't go back until after Labor Day, but anyway, I digress. Going now into the actual article itself, it says the Equalizer 3 will hit $42 million over 4 days with a 3-day of around $34.5 million. And again, that is going to be pretty much on par with many of the other films that have come out in this franchise. And again, around that $30 to $35 million range. So, hey, kudos to them for being able to do that. The film is also quite a good time. It is one of those films where it doesn't try to, rewrite things. It doesn't try to, rather, I should say, it does not try to create anything new. It does not try to be anything spectacular, anything more than what it's expected to be. And yet somehow, some way, it's able to, I think, elevate the franchise to a point that the other films have not yet been able to do so. I kind of compare this to the Rocky Balboa of the franchise, where in many ways, it might be one of the better films, though it may not be anyone's favorite necessarily, or it may not be the most entertaining. It just has that heart to it. It just has a little bit more of that, every day-to-day, looking at the person, looking at the character, going through just regular moments and doing it very well and very effectively to the point where you just care. And obviously a big part of that is Denzel Washington. But hey, kudos to them because it looks like a lot of people are interested still in this franchise, and it is doing very well. Going now over to the numbers.com, as you can see, Equalizer 3 easily in that #1 spot, $34.5 million, $8,700 per screen, while Barbie, after 7 weeks of release, so that is still also impressive, 7 weeks of release, the film is still in one, over 3,500 screens, and 2, still seeing very incredible holds, only dropping 30% from last week, only dropping 150 screens. So still a very strong per theater ratio, still doing very, very well at $10.6 million this weekend, now adding its totals domestically to get to $609.5 million. Blue Beetle from Warner Brothers is also seeing, again, decent holds percentage-wise, but because its opening weekend was quite small, especially based on the expectations that many people have for DCEU properties with the budgets that Warner Brothers spends on these projects. Again, it's just not making much money anywhere else, and so Blue Beetle is still set to be a massive flop for Warner Brothers because of that. Gran Turismo, unfortunately, had a 62% drop. Can't say I'm too surprised by that level of a drop, simply because it did try to include in its opening weekend numbers some of the previous days, some of the early releases that it had last week, not just the Thursday numbers. And so when you do that, when you try to fight for that, Sony, guess what? It means your week 2 numbers are going to look that much more abysmal. And sure enough, a 62% drop. It's going to be very hard to predict this one simply because it had an international release a couple weeks earlier prior to its domestic release. And typically my predictions and my projections are based off of the first 2 weeks when you have almost an entire release schedule, or at the very least, the vast majority of countries getting a same and similar release day on the release calendar. But Gran Turismo right now, it's not impossible for the film to make its money back, but it's also going to be it's going to need a lot of help, more so from the international market at this point, since domestically it does not seem to be getting a whole lot of love and support. Oppenheimer is also making a lot of waves because it's also seeing very, very strong holds after 7 weeks, similar to Barbie, and also it is now crossing $800+ million at the international box office. So this film, well on its way to likely crossing $900 million. Whether it gets to $1 billion, I don't necessarily think there's going to be as much in the tank left for the film, but hey, stranger things have happened, so it's a possibility. I just don't think it is probable at this point in time. Going into the actual worldwide numbers for the top films of this week, Equalizer 3 at $68 million worldwide. Again, pretty much on par with the other films in the franchise. I actually talked about this the other day on my channel about how both of these movies, or rather all three of these movies, have all been able to get to around a similar number opening weekend and a similar number worldwide, right? If you look at the first two films, there's only like a few $1 million difference. Even when you adjust for inflation, the difference is not that much. And that's a very good thing in certain ways, because it means, hey, your audience is not shrinking to any extensive degree. It's not necessarily growing, which is where you typically want to be. But in today's market, it's better to be exactly where you are, or even growing it slightly and even growing it a little bit, than to be losing drastic amounts of your audience. So Equalizer 3 doing pretty well, a pretty strong start here. Still has a little ways to go to break even, but again, off to a very strong start. The Barbie film is now at $1.38 billion, which means it is now the highest grossing film of the year. That means that it beats the Super Mario Bros. Film. Super Mario Bros. Film was at $1.359 billion. By the end of its run. Barbie is not even close to the end of its run, is at $1.38 billion. So yeah, let's just say Barbie is going to continue to basically widen the gap. It's going to easily cross the domestic, it's going to easily beat Super Mario Brothers international totals. So far, it is just over exceeded expectations domestically over and against Super Mario Brothers. So it's going to do a very similar thing internationally too, and it won't be very long before we ultimately see that. So the big question now is going to be, how far does this thing go? Does this film get to 1.5? Does it get to 1.6? If it gets to 1.5, guess what? That would put this film above Top Gun Maverick from last year. Now, the one thing that I do want to point out is that what's interesting about all of this is that Barbie at 609 versus Maverick's 718 means I think that Barbie right now domestically is slowing enough to where it matching the Top Gun Maverick domestic is probably not going to happen. But where Barbie can start to kind of run up the card, as it were, is going to be those international numbers, because it already has about a $20 million advantage against Top Gun Maverick's total internationally, and we're going to see Barbie continue to add to that as the days go by. And so what does that mean? It means that Barbie has a chance still to be able to beat Top Gun Maverick's $1.475 billion and get even close to $1.5 billion, if not a little bit more. And again, I base that specifically as far as it not matching Top Gun Maverick's domestic, because even though if you look at like-for-like weekends, right, Barbie is, wins most of these, right? There's the occasional day where Barbie was losing to Maverick. If you now get into the fourth week, you can see, right, from the fourth Wednesday on, there has not been a single day that Barbie has won against it, right? So right now, at the same point in release, Maverick was at 597, and again, it has that edge because it did have the advantage all the weeks up, right? The first 3 weeks of its release, it was beating Maverick almost every single day. But now that we're in weeks, 4, 5, and 6, we started to see a little bit of a flip there. And so now we're going to see over the course of the next couple of weeks that Maverick is going to start to catch up its ground. And we're going to see ultimately Maverick end up on top at $718 million domestically. But hey, does not really matter all that much in the grand scheme of things, because Barbie is still doing very, very well and is still making a ton of money to boot. A film that's not making money, though, is Blue Beetle at $101.8 million after a few weeks of release. Yeah, this film, as you can see, even according to the numbers, charting towards the bottom of the range there as far as other films with similar opening weekends. Gran Turismo, unfortunately, is also towards the bottom edge as well, which is sad. It's a very solid film, and I recommend people go to see it. Oppenheimer now at $850 million plus worldwide. Very, very impressive. Even more impressive, the fact that it's doing as well internationally. Again, not too surprising necessarily because of the subject matter, but hey, for a Nolan film to be doing these kinds of numbers in this market, I don't know. I think that's very impressive. A 3-hour drama. Typically, you would not see these kinds of numbers, but hey, we are absolutely seeing it. So those are the top 5 films of the week. Going now to talk about box office charting, because we love doing charting here over at Geeks and Gamers. A few of these categories have not updated yet. I'm using a new metric, and it's supposed to auto-update, but as we all know, the numbers gets bogged down with requests to be able to access the data, and sometimes it doesn't load properly, and so that's what we're seeing here. But I did try to upload at least manually the new data so that we have a better understanding of where things are. So Equalizer, right now at $68 million worldwide opening. That means it's around $64 million or so in the red. That is based off of a reported $70 million budget, meaning it needs to make roughly $175 to $200 million worldwide to break even. And guess what? this film is absolutely pacing to do about as well as the previous films in the franchise. If you take into account that most films on average make 3 times their worldwide opening, again, that's not the rule. That is just the standard. That's just the most common thing that we see. Hey, it's looking pretty good for Equalizer 3 to be able to make its money back and add a little bit of profit. Whether there's going to be more films of the franchise, it definitely has an ending to where you could do more if you wanted to. I honestly would not be surprised and would think it would actually be cooler if they let that be the end. If it was just a nice, tightly knit trilogy, I think that would be great. But again, not my decision ultimately. But Equalizer 3 is still doing pretty well. Gran Turismo, again, not doing terribly. It's made 1.3 times its budget. It just needs to get to that 2.5 multiplier. According to my charting, some people might have it closer to 3. But 41 million in the red is not insurmountable. Right now, though, it's looking like most of its money is coming from the international market. One place, though, that's not getting, or one film, rather, that's not getting much love from anywhere is Blue Beetle. It's only made $100 million worldwide, meaning it's still $118 million in the red, has only made 0.8 times its budget at this point in time. In fact, let me go ahead and see if I can update this category real quick. Right now, it is compared to its first 2 weeks, made 80%. So its first 2 weeks account for 80% of its entire box office. And what that means, yeah, this film domestically might be holding well. Internationally, though, it's just not making enough money to compensate for the amount of money that it's not making in the domestic marketplace. But these are the numbers as they stand. Blue Beetle looking to be a massive flop still. Gran Turismo is pretty much in that middle. It could end up making its money back. It's not set to be a massive hit by any means, but hey, you know what? I think that this film deserves a lot more love than what's actually getting. Same thing also with Equalizer 3, though Equalizer 3 is seemingly doing about as well as expected for a film of this franchise. And so those are the numbers as they currently stand. What are y'all's thoughts? Are you surprised to see that Barbie has beaten the Super Mario Brothers film this year? I will have to say I am, right? I did not expect either of those films to make $1 billion, and sure enough, they both did to quite a large degree. And when it comes to Barbie, it's still in the position where it could potentially be Top Gun Maverick. So let me know in the comments if you think it will indeed beat the worldwide numbers for Top Gun Maverick. And as I said, I don't think domestically it's going to be able to do that, but internationally, because it already has the edge and it's still adding money to it, I think that the edge and the advantage in the international market versus Top Gun Maverick will end up being higher to such a degree it will not need to beat Maverick's domestic total. But let me know your thoughts about that and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button. Whatever you're watching, smash it. Go check me out over at OMB Reviews if you want a fuller box office breakdown, including other films and other comparisons. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. And as always, God bless.